Welcome children. In this video 5, I will be dealing with the topic ecological succession. So let's define this term, ecological succession. Ecological succession is a sequential, gradual and predictable change in the species composition of an area over a period of time. Once again I am reiterating very important terms of the definition: sequential, gradual and predictable change in the species composition in an area over a period of time. When I wind up this slide, you will understand with the help of an example. So once again, the definition, very important parameters of the definition, it's a sequential, so it occurs in sequence, one step to the second step to the third step. No jumbling of the links, one step to the other step. It's a sequential, it's a gradual, it's not all of a sudden, very gradually from one step it moves to the second step to the third step. And last point, predictable. We know what is the ultimatum. Predictable changes in the species composition of an area over a period of time. Now we are going to, under ecological succession, we are going to learn other important terms of this broader aspect called ecological succession. Syrah, the first term is Syrah. Syrah is defined as the entire sequence of communities that successively changes in a given area. So that entire sequence is called Syrah. So all these 4 points will be once again explained with the example. As of now, I'll just give you the definitions of each in every point. Serial communities are the transitional communities of the Syrah. Climax community, as the name suggests, the final community, and it's always in equilibrium with the environment, that is constant and stable. Pioneer, as the name suggests, is the first species invading a bare area. There are two types of ecological succession. That is, ecological succession, the classification is of two types. One classification is based on time, the other one is based on habitat. But before going into the types of ecological succession, let's understand the points which I explained in the slide with the help of the next slide, which depicts the succession in a pond. Look, the first picture depicts a deep pond. You can see the water column is deep, it's almost clear, and you can't see any organisms, plants or animals. But it's understood there are the phytoplanktons. What are these phytoplanktons? They are microscopic plants, not visible to the naked eyes. They are microscopic, so they dominate this water body. So here and there you can see phytoplanktons. So these were the first to invade the pond. And because these were the first to invade the pond, the phytoplanktons can be called the pioneer community. So we have the first community invading the pond, that is the phytoplanktons. Now as you move, after some years, I told you it's very gradual. After some years, you can see the pond, what happened to the water, it becomes slightly turbid with other plant species invading. See, we have the submerged plants that have invaded. So you can see the next community, that is the submerged plants. So the name of that stage is called the submerged plant stage. Then again, after some years, we can see along with the submerged plants, there are the free floating plants. So we have two types of plants that have invaded the water body and are dominating. They are the submerged plants as well as the free floating plants. So we can call that stage as submerged free floating plant stage. Again, after some years, you can see what has happened to the water. When we move from one stage to the other stage, you can see that the water becomes shallow and shallow and shallower. What is happening? The substratum, which is indicated in brown color, initially it was very thin, now it becomes thicker and thicker and thicker. Why it is becoming thicker and thicker? How did that soil substratum increase? That is because of the death, decay and decomposition of the previous community. They get deposited on the bed, and it is rich in organic matter and facilitating the growth of more plants. That's how we had the reed swamp stage, little more dense. The water becomes very shallow, barely little water with more plants. Then fifth stage, after many years, we go to the stage called the Marsh Meadow stage. It's very marshy, no water. You know what is a marshy stage? Very clayey. The water mixed with soil is called that clay, and there are lots of plants, more denser than the fourth stage. Then we have the scrub stage. Slowly you can see, besides herbs and shrubs, we have some trees. And finally the last stage, the seventh stage, we have the forest. See, very densely populated with woody trees, shrubs, herbs, climbers, creepers, different stories of plants. So you can see a dense forest finally formed, and there's no water at all. Clear? So it started off with the pond. So now I'm going to bring all those terms which I just briefly explained previously. You understood what is pioneer community? The first species invading a bare area. So this was a bare area, pond. So the first species that invade is called the pioneer species or pioneer community. So one point is explained. And the seventh stage is the forest. So what is that? The climax community. So which is a climax community? The final community, which is almost in equilibrium. After this, there's no further stage. After forest, there's no other stage. It is final. It is stable. It is in equilibrium with the environment. So that is called the climax community. So we have the first community called the pioneer community, the last community called the climax community. Then what will be the name of the other communities between 1 to 7? So we see it moves from one community to the second community, third community, fourth community, fifth community, sixth community, seventh. So from one stage to the other stage, we got the name for the first, it's called the pioneer community. We got the name for the last, that is the climax community. So what is the name for the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth? These will be called the transitional communities. So they get the name transitional communities or Syrah communities. Syrah, S-E-R-A-L, Syrah communities. And this entire sequence from 1 to 7 is known as a Syrah. S-E-R-E, Syrah. So I have explained 4 terms which was there in the first slide. So definition, what is a Syrah? The entire sequence of communities invading an area from start to the end, that is from the pioneer to the climax, is known as Syrah. The entire sequence, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all 7 stages forms the Syrah. Second definition, what is pioneer community? The first community of species invading an area is called pioneer community. Here in the case of pond, which was the first species or which was the pioneer species, it is the phytoplankton. Third point, what is climax community? The last stage of the ecological succession or the last biotic community, that is the dense forest, which is stable and in equilibrium with the environment, is called the climax community. And the fourth point is the intermediate or the stages in between the pioneer and climax. What are those stages called? They are called the Syrah communities or the transitional communities. So with this example, I explained those 4 concepts which were introduced in the first slide. Only with the example you can understand. What is pioneer community, what is climax community, what is transitional community, and the entire sequence is called Syrah. Now you will be wondering why we are naming every community by a plant. The reason is that that particular area is dominated by plants than animals. Definitely, along with the plants, animals also thrive. For example, with phytoplanktons, there might be some insects in the first community. Then in the second community, along with the submerged plants, there might be some worms, snails, etc. Take the third case, submerged free floating plant stage. There may be a lot of arthropods in the stage. Then reed swabbed stage. Now, along with the plant species, there may be animal species. Marsh meadow stage, definitely there will be the amphibians, lots of frogs, even reptiles. Then we moving to the scrub stage, again we can see little more of rodents coming here along with the plant species. And finally the forest, we know what it comprises, both the plant species and animal species. So both the species are involved, but each stage is named after the plant species because they dominate. So that should not be a factor that is lingering in your mind, why we are not mentioning of animals. Definitely along with the plants, definitely animals thrive, but it's named after the plant species. So moving back to the previous slide. So as mentioned earlier, with the help of the example, we understood what is a Syrah, we understood what are serial communities, we understood the climax community and the pioneer community or pioneer species. Now we are going to see the two types of ecological succession. And the classification, there are two types, one based on time and the other one based on the habitat. Now based on time, we have two types of ecological succession, that is primary ecological succession and secondary ecological succession. Primary ecological succession begins in an area where no living organisms are present. So we can simply say it's a hostile, sterile, virgin environment. Second point, it is a very slow process. It takes thousands of years for reaching the climax, that is for the forest to be reached. And example is what I showed you from a pond, how the pond became ultimately a forest. Will it take just 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? No, it will take thousands of years for a river or pond or water body to get converted into a forest. So that is an example for primary succession. Other examples include from a bare rock. From the bare rock, finally it's going to end up in a forest. So it takes definitely thousands of years. Newly cooled larvae. After volcanic eruption, the larvae that is poured out, it cools. After cooling, after many years, you can see that turns out to be a forest. It takes time. And a newly created pond, the example which we saw. So in these examples, what we noticed is the succession starts off from a very bare area, sterile area, hostile environment. Second, the time required, it takes thousands to 10,000s of years for this conversion from one community to the other community and finally to reach the forest. Next, we are moving on to secondary succession, just the opposite of primary succession. It begins in an area where natural biotic communities have been destroyed. For example, a forest that was destroyed. For that forest to recoup back into a forest is an example. Then a farmland that is abandoned, after some years it becomes a forest. How long will it take? Will it take hundreds of years? No, it takes shorter time. Within 10 to 50 years it becomes a forest. Another example is a flooded land. Already the soil substratum, it's easy to become a forest. Then last example, as I told you, forest. There was a lush green forest, but due to burning, due to man's activity burning, it got destroyed, or due to deforestation and abandoning, what happens? It's left by itself. It will immediately, within 10 years, it will recoup and become a forest. So just secondary succession is just recovering or recouping. So here it starts from an area which was destroyed naturally or due to man's activity. So once again, I am reiterating, the beginning, the substratum is not a virgin or a sterile or a hostile environment. It's more favorable because it was once upon a time inhabited and it was rich with biotic communities, but it was destroyed due to man's activities or due to nature. And so to become a forest or to reach the climax, it takes a faster time. The time required is just 10 to 50 years maximum. The reason is there can be because there's already soil. We know soil is a very important substratum for plants. Once plants take off, we can understand it will reach the forest. So for the plant, for soil formation, it does not require weathering or for the soil deposition. Soil is already there, so it can take off and it reach the climax, that is forest, at a very shorter period of time compared to primary succession. Examples, as I told you, abandoned farmlands, burned or cut forest, flooded lands, etc. So once again reiterating the types of ecological succession based on time. They are classified into primary succession, which takes a lot of time to reach a forest, secondary succession, which takes a shorter time to become a forest. So there the time is a factor that is distinguishing the two types of succession, primary and secondary succession. Next, moving on to the classification based on habitat. If the habitat or the ecological succession starts from a wet environment, it's called Hydra. But if it starts from a dry environment, it is known as Syrah. Very simple, based on the habitat. If ecological succession starts from a wet area or from water, the succession is known as Hydra. Whereas Syrah succession starts from a dry area, then it is known as Syrah. So we have the Hydra and Syrah. If it's starting from water, Hydra. If it's starting from a dry environment, it's known as Syrah. And you can see in Hydra, the succession progress from hydric to mesic condition, whereas in Syrah, the succession progresses from Syric to mesic condition. So once again, there are three different types of conditions: Syric condition, hydric condition, and mesic condition. So to understand this point, you must understand these 3 points. Syric means dry. Syric. Mesic, medium. Medium dry, medium with water. Hydric, watery. So now I am bringing the second difference of Syrah. Syrah, you can see ecological succession progress from Syric to mesic. I hope you have understood. From dry environment to the medium environment. Whereas Hydra progresses, ecological succession progress from hydric to mesic. So that is going to be your second point. So once again, reiterating ecological succession based on the habitat. There are 2 types of ecological succession, Hydra and Syrah. Hydra, it starts from a wet environment, whereas Syrah starts from a dry environment. Another name for wet environment is hydric condition. Another name for dry environment is called Syric environment. So you get the first difference. Hydra starts from hydric environment, whereas Syrah starts from Syric environment. Second difference, Hydra progresses from hydric to mesic environment. Second difference for Syrah, it progresses from Syric environment to mesic environment. Clear? So this is how ecological succession is based on habitat. So the example which I showed here is dealing with Hydra or Syrah. It's dealing with Hydra because it started from a wet environment or hydric environment, and from the hydric environment it progressed to the mesic environment. Mesic environment is forest. It is not dry. It is partly dry, partly wet. So we call that environment called mesic. Clear? So I only hope that you have understood Hydra and Syrah. As the name suggests, Hydra starts from wet environment, wet or hydric environment, whereas Syrah starts from dry environment or Syric environment. Second point, Hydra, it progresses from hydric to mesic, Whereas Syrah, the ecological succession process from xeric environment to mesic environment. Ultimately, the final environment it should reach, or the final stage it should reach, is the forest, which is the most stable environment. Further, it will not change. So, it is constant and in equilibrium with the environment. After forest, there is no other stage. I hope you have understood ecological succession. It is always better to learn with the example which is given in your textbook. It is a diagrammatic representation of the ecological succession in a pond or hydra. Or it is also, if we talk with respect to time, it is a primary succession. It is not a secondary succession. So, this is a very good example for primary succession when we talk with respect to time, and with respect to the habitat, it is an example of hydra. And finally, I wind up this video with the definition. What is ecological succession? As I told you, it is a succession of the species composition. See, the composition of plant species, from phytoplanktons to submerged plant species to submerged free floating plant species to reed swamp stage to marsh meadow to scrub and finally forest. So, it is sequential. See the sequence, from first stage it goes to second, second to third, fourth. It does not skip certain stages. It correctly follows. So, it is sequential, it is, that is orderly, it is predictable, as well as it is very gradual. It does not take place fast. So, remember the three parameters. Ecological succession is a sequential, gradual, predictable change of the species composition in an area over a period of time. So, once again, it is sequential, 1, 2, 3 to the 7th stage in sequence. Then it is very gradual. It does not take place over a year or over a decade. It takes very gradually, very gradual, and it is predictable. We can predict, oh, finally this river or this pond is going to become a forest. If it is not maintained by the government or maintained by the people, it's abandoned to nature, and finally that will turn out to be a forest. So, remember, sequential, gradual and predictable change of the species composition. Here we have given emphasis to plant species. Definitely animals also thrive. So, to the plant species composition in an area over a period of time. So, finally, because this is a primary succession, maybe this pond became this forest after some 100, 200 years. Clear? I hope you have understood ecological succession. Thank you.